Hello, good evening. Tim Davie has tonight resigned as Director General of the BBC, along with the CEO of BBC News, Deborah Turness, after a week of criticism of BBC News coverage and allegations of editorial mistakes. In a statement to staff, Tim Davie said there have been some mistakes made, and as Director General, I have to take ultimate responsibility. Last week, The Telegraph published details of a leaked memo which made a number of allegations, including suggesting an edition of Panorama had selectively edited a speech by President Trump.
And today we're diving into a story that has sent shockwaves through the world of journalism and public broadcasting. A seismic shock has hit one of the world's most respected broadcasters. The British Broadcasting Corporation, the BBC, is in turmoil. Its two top news executives, Director General Tim Davie and Head of News Deborah Turness, have both resigned. The trigger? A controversial documentary, a furious former U.S. president, and a series of scandals that have left the 100-year-old institution facing a profound crisis of confidence. Today, we're asking, what led to this dramatic downfall? And what does it mean for the future of the BBC and public service broadcasting itself? Let me take you back to where this all began. It all started with a single edit in a Panorama documentary.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and I'll be there with you. And we fight. We fight like hell. And if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women. And we fight. We fight like hell. And if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore.
The BBC's flagship current affairs program that has been a cornerstone of investigative journalism for decades. The documentary, which aired last month, examined the political comeback of Donald Trump and his continued influence on American politics. But it was a segment on the January 6th Capitol Hill riot that lit the fuse. The program edited together two separate parts of a speech Trump gave that day, creating what critics say was a misleading impression that Trump had explicitly and directly encouraged the violence that followed. Now, to understand the gravity of this, we need to remember what happened on January 6, 2021. On that day, Trump spoke at a Save America rally on the Ellipse in Washington, D.C. His supporters then marched to the Capitol building where Congress was certifying the Electoral College votes from the 2020 presidential election. What followed was unprecedented in modern American history. The FBI estimates that between 2,000 and 2,500 people entered the Capitol during the attack. 5 people died in connection with the riot. It was a moment that shook American democracy to its core. The controversy over Trump's speech has been ongoing since that day. His words included phrases like fight like hell, but also peacefully and patriotically. The debate over whether his speech constituted incitement has been fierce and politically charged. Trump was impeached by the House of Representatives for incitement of insurrection, though he was later acquitted by the Senate. More than 210 criminal defendants have cited Trump's words as the reason they participated in the riot. So when the BBC edited Trump's speech in a way that appeared to strengthen the case that he directly incited violence, it stepped into one of the most contentious political debates of our time, and it did so in a way that violated its own editorial standards. The story was broken by The Telegraph, a conservative-leaning British newspaper which published a leaked internal memo from a former BBC editorial advisor named Michael Prescott. Prescott had left his role as an independent external advisor to the BBC's Editorial Standards Committee in June of this year. In his memo, he wrote that he was in despair over the edit and over what he saw as a lack of action from BBC management when issues came to light. But his concerns went beyond just the Trump documentary. He also raised issues about the BBC's coverage of transgender topics, suggesting that coverage was effectively censored by specialist LGBT reporters who he claimed promoted a pro-trans agenda. The White House was quick to condemn the BBC, calling it 100% fake news. Donald Trump himself weighed in on social media, saying top people at the BBC were quitting or being fired because they were caught doctoring my very good, perfect speech of January 6th. He called them very dishonest people and asked, "What a terrible thing for democracy." Trump also claimed that these were people who tried to step on the scales of a presidential election. This wasn't just a minor journalistic error. It struck at the very heart of the BBC's reputation for impartiality and accuracy, values that have been the foundation of the corporation since its founding in 1922. Dorothy Byrne, a former head of news at rival broadcaster Channel 4, called it a basic error and criticized the BBC for taking an inordinate length of time to apologize. Roger Mosey, a former head of BBC TV News and someone who knows the organization intimately, agreed, saying the edit doesn't seem to be defensible. He also noted that the BBC had been slow to respond to the latest allegations, a criticism that speaks to broader concerns about the corporation's crisis management. But here's the crucial point. This was not an isolated incident. The Trump documentary controversy was the tipping point after what Dame Caroline Dinenage, the chair of the UK's Culture, Media and Sport Committee, called a seemingly constant stream of crises and missteps. Let me walk you through some of these controversies, because they paint a picture of an organization under intense pressure from multiple directions. In just the past year, the BBC has faced a barrage of criticism. Just last Thursday, 20 impartiality complaints were upheld against presenter Martine Croxall for altering a script live on air. She was reading a news bulletin on the BBC News channel when she changed the script to refer to pregnant people rather than the original wording. This might seem like a small change, but it touched on one of the most divisive cultural debates in the UK and beyond, the language used around gender and pregnancy. Then there was the Gaza documentary controversy. The BBC failed to disclose that the narrator of a documentary about Gaza was the son of a Hamas official. This is a fundamental breach of journalistic transparency. When you're covering one of the world's most contentious conflicts, the background of your narrator is absolutely material information that viewers have a right to know. And it doesn't stop there. The BBC broke its own editorial guidelines on harm and offense by broadcasting a Glastonbury music festival set where the punk duo Bob Vylan led a chant of "Death, death to the IDF," referring to the Israel Defense Forces. The BBC later admitted this breached its editorial standards, but the damage was done. There was also a leaked dossier about BBC Arabic coverage that acknowledged serious editorial failures, particularly around coverage of Middle Eastern conflicts. The dossier confirmed concerns that had been raised by media watchdog organizations about bias in the BBC's Arabic language services. These incidents have fueled a long-running debate about the BBC's impartiality. And here's where things get really complicated, because the BBC is being attacked from all sides. The Conservative government in particular has been a vocal critic. Kemi Badenoch, the Conservative leader, said the resignations were right, but that there was a catalogue of serious failures that runs far deeper. She warned that the BBC should not expect the public to keep funding it through a compulsory license fee unless it can finally demonstrate true impartiality. But at the same time, the BBC is also criticized by those on the left who see it as too deferential to government power, too quick to present both sides of issues where one side may be factually incorrect. Sir Ed Davie, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, offered a stark warning. He said the resignations must be an opportunity for the BBC to turn a new leaf, but added, "The BBC isn't perfect, but it remains one of the few institutions standing between our British values and a populist, Trump-style takeover of our politics." This political pressure is a key part of the story, and it's intimately connected to how the BBC is funded. The BBC is funded by a compulsory license fee, currently £174.50 a year, paid by every household with a television. This funding model is enshrined in a royal charter, which is negotiated with the government and sets the BBC's constitutional basis, its funding, and its regulatory duties. The current charter began on January 1st, 2017, and is due to expire on December 31st, 2027. With the license fee becoming increasingly unpopular, and with powerful political figures questioning the BBC's value, the corporation is in a fight for its future. In 2025 alone, more than 300,000 households stopped paying the license fee. The UK's Culture Secretary has called the license fee unenforceable. There are growing calls for the BBC to move to a subscription-based model like Netflix or Disney Plus rather than the compulsory fee system. But would a subscription model work for the BBC? The license fee ensures that the BBC can produce content that serves the public interest, even if it's not commercially popular. It allows the BBC to invest in local news, in educational programming, in services for minority communities. A subscription model might force the BBC to chase ratings and clicks in a way that could undermine its public service mission. At the center of this storm were two highly accomplished media executives, Tim Davie and Deborah Turness. Let me tell you a bit about them because their backgrounds are important to understanding this story. Tim Davie, the Director General for the past 5 years, was a BBC veteran of 20 years. But he didn't start his career in journalism. He was a former marketing executive at PepsiCo, where he rose to become Vice President of Marketing and Franchise. Before that, he worked at Procter & Gamble. He joined the BBC in 2005 and rose through the ranks, eventually becoming CEO of BBC Studios, the corporation's commercial arm. He was acting Director General for a brief period in 2012 and 2013 following the departure of George Entwistle. When he was appointed as the 17th Director General in 2020, he was seen as a modernizer, someone who could steer the BBC through the challenges of the digital age. In his resignation statement, he insisted that the BBC's journalism continues to be admired as a gold standard and that the organization was overwhelmingly kind, tolerant, and curious. Deborah Turness, the CEO of BBC News, had been in her role since September 2022. She had a stellar journalistic pedigree. She was the president of NBC News in the United States from 2013 to 2017, making her one of the most powerful women in American television news. She then served as president of NBC News International before returning to the UK to become CEO of ITN, another major British news organization, in 2021. Before her time at NBC, she was the editor of ITV News in the UK. Her appointment to the BBC was seen as a major coup for the corporation, a sign of its continued global appeal and its ability to attract top talent. She's the only news leader to have headed a US network, a UK national newsroom, and a global brand. Their resignations have left a massive void at the top of the organization. BBC Chairman Samir Shah called it a sad day for the BBC, but acknowledged the continued pressure on Davie, both personally and professionally. Insiders have described the resignations as feeling like a coup, a victory for the BBC's critics. There's a sense that this wasn't just about editorial mistakes, but about a coordinated political campaign to undermine the BBC. The Guardian newspaper, a left-leaning publication, published an opinion piece arguing that the BBC is facing a coordinated, politically motivated attack from Trump supporters, The Telegraph, and conservative politicians. The piece suggested that the resignation of Tim Davie was the result of political pressure rather than genuine editorial failures. So, what happens now? The immediate challenge for the BBC is to restore its credibility. The next Director General will face the monumental task of rebuilding trust with the public, with politicians across the political spectrum, and with its own staff, many of whom are reportedly demoralized by the constant controversies. They will also have to navigate the treacherous waters of the Royal Charter renewal. The debate over the license fee is set to intensify, with many calling for a move to a subscription-based model. The UK's Culture Secretary, Lisa Nandy, thanked Davie for his service and said he had led the BBC through a period of significant change. She went on to say, "The BBC is one of our most important national institutions. Now more than ever, the need for trusted news and high-quality programming is essential to our democratic and cultural life and our place in the world." She added that the government would ensure the Charter review is the catalyst that helps the BBC to adapt to this new era. But what that new era will look like is far from clear. The BBC is a cherished British institution, a global symbol of quality broadcasting. Its world service reaches hundreds of millions of people around the globe. Its nature documentaries, its dramas, its news coverage are watched and admired worldwide. But in an increasingly polarized world, can it continue to be all things to all people? Can it maintain its commitment to impartiality when the very concept of objective truth is under attack? When different political factions have fundamentally different understandings of reality? These are not easy questions, and they're not unique to the BBC. Public broadcasters around the world are facing similar challenges. In the United States, public broadcasting has been under attack for decades, with repeated attempts to defund NPR and PBS. In Australia, the ABC faces constant criticism and budget cuts. In Canada, the CBC is fighting for its survival. The model of public service broadcasting, funded by taxpayers or license fee payers, is under strain everywhere. The crisis at the BBC is more than just a media story. It's a story about politics, about culture, and about the future of public discourse in the 21st century. It's about how we as a society determine what is true and what is false. It's about who gets to tell our stories and how those stories are told. It's about whether institutions that were built for the 20th century can survive and thrive in the 21st. The next chapter in the BBC's long and storied history is yet to be written. But one thing is certain: the world is watching. The decisions made in the coming months will shape not just the future of the BBC, but the future of public service broadcasting globally. Will the BBC emerge from this crisis stronger and more resilient? Or will it be fundamentally transformed, perhaps diminished, by the political and financial pressures it faces? Only time will tell. But for now, the BBC is at a crossroads, and the path it chooses will have profound implications for journalism, for democracy, and for the public sphere. Thanks for listening. Join us next time as we go beyond the headlines to explore the stories that matter.